The sauna door creaked open, and in that split second, my heart stopped. I wasn't alone anymore. Through the haze of steam, his shadow loomed, hesitant but deliberate, like he'd been wrestling with the decision to step inside. It was late, past midnight, at the old community gym in downtown Seatley, a place where fluorescent lights flickered and the air always smelled faintly of pine and sweat. I'd come here to escape, to let the heat melt away the chaos of my life, a failing graphic design gig, a family that didn't know the real me, and a heart bruised from too many half-spoken truths. The sauna was my sanctuary, a place where I could sit in silence, wrapped in a towel, and pretend the world didn't exist. Until tonight. Elliot walked in, his towel slung low around his hips, his broad shoulders catching the dim light. I'd seen him before, always at the gym, always with that quiet intensity, his dark eyes scanning the room like he was searching for something he'd never find. We'd never spoken. Not really. Just exchanged nods or the occasional hey in passing. But now, here he was, choosing the bench across from me, the air between us thick with steam and something else, something unspoken. "You come here a lot," he said, his voice low, almost swallowed by the hiss of the sauna's heater. It wasn't a question, more like an observation, like he'd been watching me too. I swallowed, my throat dry despite the humidity. "Yeah, it's quiet." I didn't know what else to say. My pulse was racing, and I wasn't sure if it was the heat or the way his gaze lingered on me, steady and unreadable. He nodded, leaning back, his arms resting on the bench. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a conversation without words, like we were both testing the waters, afraid to dive in. I caught myself staring at the way the light played off his collarbone, the way a bead of sweat traced a slow path down his chest. I looked away, my cheeks burning, but not from the sauna. "I'm Elliot," he said finally, breaking the quiet. "Figured we should at least know each other's names if we're going to share a sauna at 1 a.m. I laughed, a nervous sound that echoed too loudly in the small space. "Miles," I said, meeting his eyes for the first time. They were darker than I'd thought, almost black, but warm, like they held stories he wasn't ready to tell. We talked, at first about nothing: music, the gym, the way Seattle's rain never seemed to stop. But the conversation shifted, grew heavier, like the steam pressing against our skin. He told me about growing up in a small town in Montana, where being different wasn't just frowned upon, it was dangerous. I shared pieces of my own story, the weight of my family's expectations, the way I'd learned to hide who I was to keep the peace. It was strange, how easy it was to open up to a stranger, how the heat seemed to strip away our defenses. "I've seen you here before," he admitted, his voice softer now. "Always alone. You looked, I don't know, like you were carrying something heavy." I froze, my breath catching. No one had ever noticed that, not my coworkers, not my friends, not even my sister, who claimed to know me better than anyone. But Elliot saw it, saw me, and it terrified me as much as it thrilled me. "I could say the same about you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Our eyes locked again, and this time, neither of us looked away. The air felt charged, like a storm was building in the space between us. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, but my words caught in my throat. He leaned forward, just slightly, his hands clasped together. "Miles," he said, and the way he said my name sent a shiver down my spine. "Why do you come here? Really?" The question hit me like a punch. I could have lied, brushed it off with a joke, but something about the way he looked at me made me want to be honest. "Because it's the only place I can breathe," I said. "The only place I don't have to pretend." He didn't say anything for a long moment, just watched me, his expression unreadable. Then he stood, crossing the small space between us, and sat on the bench beside me. Not touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said, so quietly I almost missed it. My heart was pounding now, loud enough that I was sure he could hear it. I wanted to reach out, to close the gap between us. But fear held me back, fear of what it would mean, of what I'd be admitting to myself if I did. But then he turned, his knee brushing against mine, and the world narrowed to that single point of contact. "Miles," he said again, and this time, there was no mistaking the weight in his voice. "I've been coming here every night, hoping you'd be here." I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, my body caught between panic and something else, something warm and reckless and alive. Before I could stop myself, I reached out, my fingers grazing his wrist. His skin was hot, slick with sweat, and he didn't pull away. The sauna felt smaller now, the walls closing in, the heat wrapping us in a cocoon where nothing else existed. I don't know who moved first, maybe it was me. Maybe it was him, but suddenly our hands were intertwined, our breaths mingling in the steamy air. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet. But it was something more intimate, something that felt like a promise. And then the door creaked open again. A gym employee poked his head in, oblivious to the moment he'd shattered. "Closing in 10. He grunted before disappearing. The spell broke, and Elliot pulled his hand back, his expression shifting to something guarded, almost guilty. I felt the loss of his touch like a physical ache. We didn't speak as we left the sauna, the cool air of the locker room hitting us like a slap. I kept my eyes on the floor, afraid to look at him, afraid of what I'd see or what I wouldn't. We changed in silence, the rustle of clothes and the slam of lockers the only sounds. When I finally glanced up, he was already gone. The next few days were torture. I couldn't stop thinking about that night, the way his voice had softened when he said my name, the way his hand had felt in mine. But every time I went to the gym, he wasn't there. I started to wonder if I'd imagined it, if the heat had played tricks on my mind. Maybe I'd misread everything. Maybe he regretted it. Work didn't help. My boss was breathing down my neck about a deadline for a client's logo redesign, and every sketch I produced felt lifeless, like I was pouring my frustration onto the page. At home, my sister, Lena, kept pushing me to come to family dinners, oblivious to the fact that sitting across from our parents meant lying to their faces about who I was. I was unraveling, and the one person who'd seen me, really seen me, was nowhere to be found. A week later, I saw him, not at the gym, but at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and baristas who knew your order by heart. He was sitting by the window, a book open in front of him, but his eyes were fixed on the street outside. My heart lurched. I wanted to run, to pretend I hadn't seen him, but my feet carried me inside. "Miles," he said when he saw me, his voice a mix of surprise and something warmer, something that made my chest ache. "I didn't think I'd see you here." I could say the same, I said, sliding into the chair across from him. My hands were shaking, so I shoved them into my pockets. "You've been avoiding the gym." He looked down, his fingers tracing the edge of his book. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me. After, you know. After you said you'd been coming to the sauna every night hoping I'd be there," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I regretted it immediately, but I couldn't take it back. His eyes flicked up, and for a moment, I saw the same vulnerability I'd seen in the sauna. "I meant it," he said, but I got scared. I'm not good at this." "At what?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "At letting myself want something I'm not supposed to," he said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the coffee shop. I didn't know how to respond. My whole life, I'd been told that what I felt was wrong, that it was something to hide, to bury. But hearing Elliot say it out loud, hearing him admit to the same fear, made me feel less alone. It also made me angry not at him, but at the world that had made us both feel this way. Let's get out of here, I said, standing up. I need air. We walked through the streets of Capitol Hill, the city alive with neon lights and laughter spilling out of bars. Neither of us spoke at first, but the silence wasn't heavy like it had been in the locker room. It felt like we were rebuilding something. Step by step, we ended up at Volunteer Park, sitting on a bench under a canopy of trees, the city's glow muted by the leaves. I grew up thinking I'd never get to have this, Elliot said, his voice soft. Someone who gets it. Someone who sees me. I turned to him, my heart pounding. I see you, I said. And this time, I didn't hold back. I reached for his hand, and he let me take it, his fingers curling around mine. It wasn't like the sound of this was deliberate, a choice made in the open air, under the stars. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. He told me about his first crush, a boy in high school who never knew how Elliot felt. I told him about the time I almost came out to my parents, how I'd chickened out at the last second. We laughed. We argued. We shared pieces of ourselves we'd kept hidden for too long. And when he leaned in and kissed me, soft and tentative, it felt like the world had finally stopped spinning out of control. But the next morning, reality crashed back in. My phone buzzed with a text from Lena. Mom and Dad want you at dinner tonight. No excuses. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. I wasn't ready to face them. Not after last night. Not when I could still feel Elliot's lips on mine. Dinner was a disaster waiting to happen. My parents' house in Bellevue was all sharp angles and pristine furniture, a reflection of their need for control. Lena was there, chattering about her new job, oblivious to the tension radiating from me. My dad kept asking about my work. His tone clipped, like he was already disappointed in my answers. My mom just smiled, her eyes searching mine for something I wasn't ready to give. I kept thinking about Elliot, about the way he'd looked at me in the park, like I was someone worth seeing. It made the weight of my parents' expectations feel heavier, like a chain I'd been dragging my whole life. Halfway through dinner, my dad brought up my future, his code for settling down, getting married, fitting into the life they'd planned for me. I gripped my fork so hard my knuckles turned white. Miles, you're not getting any younger, he said, cutting into his steak. You need to start thinking about what's next. A good job. A family. I have a job. I snapped, my voice sharper than I meant. The table went quiet. Lena looked at me, her eyes wide, and my mom's smile faltered. Is something wrong? She asked, her voice soft but probing. I wanted to tell them. I wanted to say, I'm in love with a man, and he makes me feel more alive than I've ever felt. But the words stuck in my throat, choked by years of fear and shame. Instead, I mumbled an excuse and left the table, my heart pounding as I stepped outside into the cool night air. I called Elliot. He picked up on the first ring. Miles, you okay? No, I said, my voice breaking. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending. Where are you? He asked, and I could hear the concern in his voice, the same warmth that had drawn me to him in the sauna. I told him, and 20 minutes later, he was there, pulling up in a beat-up sedan that looked like it had seen better days. I climbed in, and we drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound. He took me to his apartment, a small, cluttered place in Fremont with books stacked on every surface and a view of the city skyline through a smudged window. We didn't talk about my parents or the dinner. Instead, he made me coffee, and we sat on his couch, our knees touching, You don't have to go through this alone, he said, his hand resting on mine. I'm here. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I let myself believe it. I leaned in, and this time, the kiss wasn't tentative, it was desperate. Hungry. Like we were trying to make up for all the years we'd spent hiding. His hands were in my hair, mine on his chest, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. But the world doesn't stop, not even for moments like that. The next day, I got a call from my sister. What happened last night? She demanded. Mom's worried, and Dad's pissed. You just stormed out. I couldn't stay, I said, my voice flat. I'm tired of lying. There was a long pause. Lying about what? She asked, and I could hear the confusion in her voice. I took a deep breath. I'm gay, Lena, and I'm in love with someone. The silence on the other end was deafening. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, hesitant. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was scared, I admitted. I'm still scared. She didn't say much after that, just asked me to come over and talk. I agreed, but my stomach was in knots. I didn't know what to expect, and the thought of losing my familia, losing the only constant I'd ever known, made me feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. Elliot was there when I needed him. We met at the gym that night, not in the sauna, but in the weight room, where the clank of metal and the hum of treadmills drowned out my thoughts. He didn't push me to talk, just stayed close, his presence steadying me. When I finally told him about Lena, about my fear of losing her, he took my hand and squeezed it. You're not alone, he said again, and I clung to those words like a lifeline. Lena's apartment was a mess of art supplies and half-finished canvases, a stark contrast to our parents' sterile house. She hugged me when I walked in, her arms tight around me, and for a moment, I thought maybe it would be okay. We sat on her couch, and I told her everything about Elliot, about the sauna, about the way I'd been hiding for so long it felt like I was suffocating. She listened, her eyes soft but serious. I wish you'd told me sooner, she said. I hate that you felt like you had to hide. I didn't know how you'd react, I said, my voice cracking. I didn't want to lose you. You're not going to lose me, she said fiercely. You're my brother. I love you. It wasn't perfect. She had questions, and I could tell she was still processing. But it was a start. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe, like the weight I'd been carrying was a little lighter. Telling my parents was harder. I did it a week later, with Lena by my side. My dad's face went red, then pale, and he didn't speak for the rest of the night. My mom cried, not because she was angry, but because she hadn't known how much I was hurting. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was a crack in the wall. A chance for something better. Elliot and I grew closer. Our nights no longer confined to the sauna. We went on dates, real dates. To restaurants and movie theaters and quiet corners of the city where we could just be. Every touch, every glance, felt like a victory. Like we were reclaiming pieces of ourselves we'd thought were lost. One night, we went back to the sauna. It was different now. Less like a sanctuary and more like a memory we could revisit without fear. We sat on the same bench, our shoulders touching, and he smiled at me, his eyes bright in the dim light. I'm glad I walked in that night, he said, his voice soft. Me too, I said, and I meant it. That night had changed everything. It shown me that I didn't have to hide, that I could be seen and loved for who I was. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't over. There were still battles to fight, still fears to face. But with Elliot by my side, I felt ready. We left the sauna hand in hand, the cool air of the gym wrapping around us. Outside, Seattle was alive with lights and sound, a city that didn't care who we were or who we loved. And for the first time, I didn't care either. I was Miles. And I was enough.